if you want to stay for conversation and questions, please do so at that time. Okay. All right. I do want to acknowledge that we're in partnership with Friends of Highland Arts. And we're very thankful to Colleen Zero-White, who is giving us the internet access. I don't know if anybody's here with us from the St. Catharines Mapping Prejudice Project. That project in Minneapolis for Hennepin County is now being done for Ramsey County at St. Catharines, and we're working with them on that issue of redlining and racial covenants, especially as it relates to housing in Highland. So I want to just briefly mention who's here. We have Anise Gregerson, who's on our team. You want to just wave? Judy Hildman, Susan Gangle, Jane McClure. Want to say hello, Jane? I don't know if Frank is on yet. Frank Jossie. Catherine, who is our super great assistant, and Margaret George is here, who has just recently joined our team. And we maybe will have Kathy Crowley. She's looking at us and seems she wants to be involved with us. We hope so. And I think we got everybody there. All right, good. So we are, Marilyn Chiat and Jeannie Kildee will meet them as we begin our pre-recorded segment on the Houses of Worship website. Okay.
So I'll be screen sharing with all of you.
And yeah, this is us at the other.
So,
okay,
everybody, we're very glad to have the opportunity to present this amazing website with the founders of the entire project. I would like to introduce Jean Kildee and Marilyn Chiat, who created this project about houses of worship in the Twin Cities area. They will explain the parameters that have been set up and how they went about their research. I'd also like to say thanks to Susan Gangle, who is our researcher for the Highland Heritage Project. We learned about this project through her. We discovered that the investigation that Jean and Marilyn have done and the findings corresponded very closely with what we're finding here in Highland about our own houses of worship. At this moment, let me also mention that Anise Gregerson is here, and Judy Hildman, who are our prime interviewers and have done a great deal of research for this project. So let's see, Jean, you've offered to show us around the site, and this seems like a really good thing to do for a Zoom event. So I'm going to let you and Marilyn explain the project and take us around and tell us about the 10 neighborhoods that were studied in this time period, which is from 1850 to 1924, I believe.
Yes.
So take it away.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much to the Highland Heritage Project for inviting us to participate, to share our research with you. This research project has been going on for quite a while. I'm going to share my screen with you now so that you can see the website, and we'll take a little tour. Just put this on full view. Okay, so this is the Houses of Worship website. I have to say that it's in process right now. It's parented out of the University of Minnesota, and they are in the process of changing the underlying software architecture from Drupal to Drupal Lite. So I don't actually have access to much of this site right now. I did notice a couple corrections that I wanted to make, but we're not able to do those right now, so I apologize for that. But this project began with Marilyn Chiat and myself way back in 2010 or so, thinking about the relationship amongst and between religious groups nationally at that time, but then also thinking about how relationships amongst religious groups occurred historically in the Twin Cities area, particularly where we both have had expertise and projects researching religious architecture, space, and ethnic groups. So what we kind of got together and decided that we would try and trace some of the history of the relationships amongst religious groups in the Twin Cities, thinking that it would mainly be a matter of looking at secondary sources that were already compiled and we're thinking about religious groups. But as it turned out, our project really ended up being one of getting down there into the primary sources to really try to collect information and data on religious organizations that had never been compiled before. So this is one of those, it's very much a project of trying to collect as much data as possible. We were very fortunate in that we were able to attract a number of sponsors, particularly in the early years, and particularly the Minnesota Historical Society Cultural and Heritage Legacy Grant Program. They funded quite a bit of this research, including some of our graduate student researchers, some of our oral history projects, and so forth. And so we're very grateful to the Historical Society in the state of Minnesota for that. Our other sponsors included, and this is one of the pages I can't correct yet, but included various units at the University of Minnesota where I teach. The Friends of the Immigration History Research Center were our sponsors for most of the project, and we thank them for being there. Also, U-Spatial at the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Population Center, the CLA OIT, which is now Lattice, provided a lot of expertise as well, and the CLA Dean's Office provided freshman researchers for much of our project. So we had a lot of help in this. The project itself, which is explained in our sort of on our about page, at least explained partly there. The project itself was, we delineated it, or we tried to narrow it. Minneapolis and St. Paul are big places. We narrowed it by time. We really wanted to get those early congregations. So from 1849, when white settlement first takes off here in St. Paul, until 1924, when immigration closes in the United States. So that was our time parameter. And to change, or to narrow geographically, we focused on 5 neighborhoods in Minneapolis and 5 in St. Paul. So on our website, there's 2 important things that I would point out. One is the browse feature, and we'll go to that in a minute. But the geography feature gives us a sense of the parameters, the spatial parameters. So there's an interactive map. It can be accessed there, where it says here. And what this map does is it brings up over about 250 organizations that we plotted, that we mapped during this period. There's a time scale, so you can move in and out time-wise, and we'll kind of focus here on St. Paul to look at a different layer. On the time scale, you can change the time to different periods. So here we have 1847 to 1852, a small number of organizations. Move back in a little bit more to look at those. And you can point, find more information that way. And then you can move the time slider up. Geographically speaking, the neighborhoods that we looked at, and you can get a sense of that from where the points are that we plotted. We really focused on congregations in the very earliest neighborhoods that were founded in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So right around the river, that was where we were looking initially. downtown, West Side Flats, Lower Town, up onto Dayton's Bluff, and into the Frogtown Rondo area, going a little bit to the east. In Minneapolis, we looked at the downtown area, Cedar Riverside, St. Anthony, up here, North Minneapolis, and Northeast Minneapolis. So those are those are our geographical restrictions that we abided by. If we go back here, we can just want to get back to the houses of worship page, the main page. And what you'll see here is also then our browse feature. And this is the main feature where our research is collated and gathered. You'll notice that some of the entries are not complete. We're still working on this project. But I thought we'd spend a little bit of time looking at a few of these different sites. And here I want to call on Marilyn because she has a good deal of expertise on several of the sites that we want to look at in this brief tour. So Marilyn, did you want to start out with the West Side Flats in St. Paul?
Well, let's start with the West Side Flats because I think that for your research because of the fact that's where the Eastern European Jews who began to arrive at St. Paul in 1881, that's where they ended up. And perhaps you're not aware of that there was for many years during this war a great division within the Jewish community in St. Paul between the early arrivals, who were primarily German-speaking, who arrived in the 1850s, and those Eastern European Orthodox Jews arrived in 1881, totally unexpectedly, at the depot in St. Paul. These are people fleeing the pogroms that were happening in Eastern Europe. The German-speaking Jews, these Eastern European Jews, reluctantly, and settled them in the flats, which at that time, as you probably know, was the first area of settlement for many ethnic groups. The Jews weren't the only ones who settled there. That is telling Jeannie, at one time there were 11 churches on the flats, everything from Norwegian and Swedish Lutheran to St. Michael's, which was Irish Catholic, to St. Matthew's, which was German Catholic, to Serbian Orthodox, Maronite, and Guadalupe for the Mexican Catholic. So it was an area that was extremely diverse. And so for us, it was very interesting looking at the various churches and synagogues that were being used at that time. And what we found, for example, was something that we discovered very common, that, for example, one of the synagogues called Hebra Ashkenaz. Hebra means friends in Hebrew. Ashkenaz is the name given to Jews from Eastern Europe. So it meant friends of the Jews from Eastern Europe actually bought an old church that had been abandoned. And the first synagogue, one of the first synagogues on the flats was actually in an old church. But this is not uncommon. This is something that we find in many, many neighborhoods. So at one time there were actually, I believe it was 9 or 10 different synagogues on the flats. And you might ask why so many? They were all Jewish, because there was a custom among the Jewish immigrants who arrived to cluster together with people from their own shtetl. A shtetl is what the Jews were forced to live in Eastern Europe, in the Pale settlement, which was part of the Russian Empire. So when they came to the New World and they settled in the flats, they would cluster with the people from their own community and form a congregation with members from that community. It took a long time. It wasn't until they began to leave the flats and move to the Selby Dale area that they began to consolidate their synagogues. And that was primarily because of the second generation, who no longer had that feeling for the old shtetl in Eastern Europe. So they lived on the flats, many of them, until 1920s. And the flats continued to have a Jewish community until it was actually demolished. But they would, I have this wonderful quote I told Judy, I interviewed many years ago, a man at that time was probably in the 70s or 80s, who said to me that living on the flats was like living still in the shtetls in Eastern Europe, that he did not feel that he arrived into America until he crossed the Robert Street Bridge and entered Lower Town. And that's kind of a profound image if you think about it. That was such a, what should I say, it was such a community that was so separated from the rest. And that even though the German-speaking Jews in 1899, I think it was 1890s, started Neighborhood House, which I hope you're familiar with. That was started initially by the women of Mount Zion, which was a Reformed temple, the first synagogue in the state of Minnesota, formed by these German-speaking Jews. And they started Neighborhood House in an effort to Americanize these Eastern European Jews who they felt would be a cause for anti-Semitism if they became dependent on welfare. So this is one of the reasons the Neighborhood House was signed. So you're looking at Sons of Zion, Jimmy just had up there. B'nai is actually was their real name. B'nai means sons in Hebrew of Zion. I think that's explanatory. And you can see that and they did not want to become part of Sons of Jacob, which was an Orthodox Jewish congregation already established by Polish Jews. They didn't identify with these Polish Jews. They wanted to be their own, and that's the reason they started it.
So
This one, yes, go ahead.
I would just say sort of demonstrating other aspects of the diversity of congregations that we tracked here. St. James AME, for instance, African Methodist Episcopal Church, quite a bit of information. And that church, of course, is up into the Rondo area on the map. Not sure if I'd be able to find that.
And I think if you'll look at this, what you'll see is interesting is that Mount Zion's first synagogue, built in 1871, was on 10th and Minnesota. You know where Zion is? The building on 10th, that is where the first synagogue in Minnesota was erected. Actually, it looked like a little early Gothic church, except it did not have a steeple. That church was, that synagogue then was sold to the Sons of Abraham, which was a congregation established on the flat, moved out of the flats. Then they sold that synagogue, went to St. James AME Church. Again, an example of how these buildings would pass from only one religion to the other. And this is something Jeannie and I have seen happening over and over again with these buildings throughout the period of 1880 to 1924. I don't know, how many of those have we found already, Jeannie?
Well, one of the things we found is that most congregations moved several times. And so with 250 organizations, we traced over 600 addresses. So places were moving, they were renting spaces from other congregations, they were moving into retail, sometimes commercial space, or community centers. But there's a lot of engagement around real estate amongst religious organizations at this time.
Well, one of the things Jeannie pointed out to me was St. Leo, initially before the building, the first church was built, was meeting in the Highland Theater that was owned by the Mann family, and the Mann family, of course, are Jewish. So that's another wonderful example.
Yes, one of the things that were so interesting, and we thank you both for all your work on this, because you've contributed to what we're doing with our Highland Heritage Legacy Grant Research Project, that we're showing the real ties that existed in this in the Highland area.
Absolutely.
The movement of the Jewish families into Highland, we're documenting that, and our ties with the Temple of Aaron and Gloria Dei Lutheran Church, their tie with with Mount Zion. All this is so fascinating, so relevant today.
Yes, it is. And,
It's also, go ahead.
and I say Temple of Aaron, as I said, was founded by some first generation, a lot of second generation, moving out of the flats to the Selby Dale area, which was part of Rondo. And the Jewish and African American communities coexisted in that area really until after the Second World War, which I think is another area that needs to be more research done. I've got wonderful quotes in there in what I wrote about this area, where there were Jewish stores and African American shops right across the street from one another. And I don't think that's part of St. Paul's history that's been lost. The Temple of Aaron stayed in that area until 1956. When after the Second World War is when the Jews began to leave Selby Dale in the lower town, and who remained on the flats and began to move to Highland, which was just opening up at that time. So there is your connection. And Temple of Aaron, of course, moved down the Mississippi River and built that beautiful synagogue that was designed by a very famous Jewish architect, Percival Goodman. And I don't know if you know or not, but that synagogue houses some very important art. Very important.
Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
Beautiful interior as well.
Yes, and we hope to be able to focus on not only the sacred spaces in Highland, but also the sacred art. That's one of our future projects.
Yes. Temple of Aaron not only has an art collection, but its windows, its eternal light. Helen Frankenthaler, the very famous woman abstract expressionist, is the one who designed the cover in front of the Torah Ark, just to give you an example of the kind of art that's in that building.
Wow. Very neat.
Well, we've also discovered some very interesting ties with the Highland area. Could we look at the Pilgrim Baptist Church? Because of the fact that it was started by slaves who were kind of rescued, I think. They were found on the Mississippi.
Now we've got that information about Pilgrim. Maybe you could bring that up, Chief.
And of course, they were brought up to the area by a steamboat. They rescued them on the Mississippi, and then to Fort Snelling, which is right here. So they were early visitors to our area. We consider that. And then it took them a while to, very quickly, I think they actually got into forming their own congregation. But that's a fascinating story.
Absolutely.
And
And
the fact that,
go ahead, Marilyn. The fact that they arrived the fact that they arrived in 1963, I think is very important, because it would have been just shortly after the Dakota War and the internment of the Dakota people within that Fort Snelling area. Mm-hmm. And
Now,
probably right concomitant with that internment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What I was wondering is, what was the exact proclamation of emancipation? What was the date of that? And so were they escaped slaves, or had they were freed now but trying to get away from the South? I don't know. It's so interesting to know their backstory there.
Mm-hmm. And that was 1862 as well.
62, so yeah. So, and then I also,
Stories.
Marilyn, did you have something to add?
No, I was just going to comment that Pilgrim Baptist was a mission of a white, the First Baptist Church, a white congregation, whereas St. James was founded by Blacks. It never was a mission of a white church, which makes it a little bit more unique than Pilgrim. St. James was able to start on its own, and that's rather interesting. Another interesting point is the difference between the African American and Jewish community and communities in St. Paul and Minneapolis. I think that's something that you need to explore more. St. Paul was far more accepting of both the Jews and the Blacks who settled there than Minneapolis was. I don't know if you know it, but in the 1950s, Minneapolis was known as the anti-Semitic capital of the United States. At the time that you had a Jewish president of your automobile club in 1950 in St. Paul, Minneapolis's automobile club would not allow Jewish members, just to give you an example. In our research, we found such a difference in the attitude of where Jews could live and build their houses of worship as opposed to Minneapolis.
Marilyn, I wonder if the West Side Flats had a role to play in that kind of attitude of tolerance of various backgrounds and races and communities of faith.
I'll tell you what part of it was. This is, just based on some very preliminary research. St. Paul was founded by Catholics and Germans. The Catholics were not, I don't have to tell you, there was anti-Catholicism in this country. The Jews who came to St. Paul, many of them were German speaking, they identified with many of the other Germans there. They also identified with the Catholics. I found a note at the Minnesota Historical Society from Archbishop Ireland to the rabbi of Mount Zion congregation, thanking the congregation and the rabbi for their donation to the cathedral so they could complete the dome. Now that says a lot, doesn't it?
It does. Yes, I like that.
At the same time, in Minneapolis, you had First Baptist Church and many of the, which I should say, the Yankees, who were the initial settlers in Minneapolis, and then the Scandinavians they brought over afterwards were terribly anti-Semitic, almost violently anti-Semitic, totally different. And I think it's worth looking at a little bit at that and recognizing that there is a difference, and the Jewish communities are very aware of it.
Wow. Thank you.
And it's the same thing with, incidentally, with the African American. You had an upper class African American community in St. Paul, and they had barbershops, very successful barbershops. And I also found it was very interesting that St. James AME Church had German classes. They were teaching their congregants German so they could talk to their employers who were primarily German speaking. Those are really, I think, insights that are important to your research.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like it.
That was interesting. Well, one other little tie, and I don't know if I'm stretching it, but I found this fascinating that with the Rondo neighborhood, and Marilyn and Jean, if you tell me if I'm on the right track here, that the French Canadian Joseph Rondeau, spelled Rondeau, and his partner Josephine, originally it seemed to my mind that they settled in what was known as Old Rumtown, which was off of Elsie Lane.
That's right.
Yeah, and right there, close to where I live, actually, and it's almost in the heart of Highland.
Yep.
And then they were the early settlers,
Hi.
and then they got booted out. I don't know if you want to elaborate more on what happened there, and then they went elsewhere. But so we have all these ties that keep popping up.
Well, you know what you have to establish is your foundation, and that's what kind of I'm providing you about Highland. You know, who are these people who settled in Highland? Not only the early settlers, but those who came afterwards. What is their background? What is their history? Where did they come from? Why did they end up in Highland? What was there? And I think Highland, I mean, you've got the Lubavitchers. Do you know who they are?
Yes, we do. Yes, we've interviewed. Yes, we have interviewed Rabbi Zeilengold and
Good. Good.
a doctor.
Because I think that's really important.
Yes, it is.
Or
You know, they did not settle in Minneapolis.
Susan, did you have a question?
Yeah, who were you talking about? I didn't catch the name. Lubavitchers is what, I didn't really catch the name.
Their follow, well, I don't want to go into the whole
I think I know how to spell it. I just didn't know how to say it. Okay.
Lubavitcher.
It's the problem of being a librarian, you know. You read more than you know.
I'm not good at Scandinavian, so it's okay. Or Latin. Yeah, but I think that's a very important thing for you to look into as well. I do know that Rabbi Feller lived right next door to one of my friends in Highland. And Rabbi Feller's family is from Minneapolis. But when he founded the Lubavitchers, he did it in St. Paul.
Yes, and so we also have, just discovered a lot of ties with the building of the old St. Leo's. And just it's interesting to really see how those ties, the community supported each other. And we're finding out more and more. And what also was interesting is the immigration to our area. One of the Catholic churches, the St. Therese, when that closed, it was used by an Eritrean Orthodox. Then it was sold to a Korean Catholic church.
Wonderful.
And then now the St. Mary's Orthodox owns it. And actually later on we'll have a picture of the interior of the church.
Jackie, you should add the Ethiopian Orthodox, right?
Yes. Oh, did I say?
You skipped
Ethiopian Orthodox, St. Mary's Ethiopian Orthodox, yes.
No.
So.
Excellent.
And that process, so the serial use of a single space, a single building by different organizations over time is something we found a lot of in the early period. So, the contemporary period where we've got high immigration again, we're seeing that same pattern. And for a lot of people, I think there's a concern that they see this as new. They see this as a replacement and problematic in some ways. And yet it's a historical process that we've just not documented well. We've just not been aware of it sufficiently in the early period to have a good perspective on what's, on contemporary patterns too.
Yes, I found when
We're finding history is repeating itself.
and just from our historical perspective that we maybe you mentioned in your paper, Jean, that there's silos of investigation when that doesn't really reflect the reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what we've found is it's often more effective to kind of focus on and think about the major sort of geographical changes that occurred. So for our work on Minneapolis, for instance, the highways, when Highway 94 went through, became a really important aspect of our research. And a lot of research has been done on Rondo in '94, going through Rondo. But one of the things that I think has been under examined is the migration of people out of Rondo after that highway went through in the late 1950s, early 1960s. First Methodist, that was over there in, I think on Holly Avenue, Victoria and Holly. First Methodist decided to move because they, as a kind of white flight situation, when they learned that once the highway was going through, African-American residents from Rondo were expected to move south and into their neighborhood. So they moved further west, right? I'm sure that other types of migrations out of not only Rondo, but also the Summit Avenue area of in Cathedral Hill of St. Paul occurred in the early 1960s. And my guess, this is just a guess, but I mean, guess you can find some of those folks moving into the Highland area at this time. So those kinds of, even though Highway 94 is not particularly close to Highland, they may well have been part of a wave of people moving during that time.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much. Are there any additional points you want to make on your project or what you're discovering?
Oh, it's a lot of time and labor, but highly enjoyable.
Well, we should talk about the north side a little bit, because that's another area where we're finding, Jeannie and I are now looking at 3 synagogues on the north side that are, one is a mission and 2 are African-American churches. Again, another example of the reuse of the buildings. And this has become a very interesting part of our project.
Well, I have a very important question for both of you, and that is, what is in the future of your project?
That's a good question.
Well, one thing, as Marilyn pointed out with the North Side project, we have identified 3 buildings and are working on one particularly right now to try to get it listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So I'm sure that as you do your research, you're going to find buildings and sites that deserve, national recognition as well. So keep that in mind. Other plans, eventually we do intend to try and compile, at least if not magazine articles, probably a book on the kinds of stories that we're finding about interactions amongst religious groups. That I think will be the real legacy of this project.
For example, I've been, my own little area, I've been discovering a lot of interesting information about the role of newsboys and what they played in the interaction, let's say, within ethnic groups, as many of them were, well, 90% of them were Jewish and the rest of them were African American. And there was a real effort by some, especially in Minneapolis, Protestant churches, to form voice clubs for these newsboys that they saw, to quote one of the church bulletins, as they saw as doorways for these boys to enter into the church. And then they, after about, 10, 15 years of effort, they became disgusted because the parents were involved. It didn't work, but it's an interesting story that has not been explored. And we're finding other stories like that surfacing that need to be told.
Marilyn and Jeannie, I remember hearing that story and maybe seeing some kind of a video. Is there something out there on the U of M website or somewhere about that story?
About the newsboys?
Yeah. Because I've heard it. I've heard that.
At some point, I hope to be able to publish something about it, yes.
Okay.
It's a very, very interesting story because it shows the efforts to Americanize, but also, and this is why St. Paul is different, the Protestant church felt that it was America, that their ideals, their faith, their beliefs were American. And that's why in Minneapolis, and Jeannie can tell you the story too, the Catholics were also, let's say, there was a definite anti-Catholic feelings in Minneapolis. One of the reasons Archbishop Ireland built the Basilica of St. Mary where he did is because he wanted the Catholics to have a visible presence in Minneapolis. And as I don't know if you know it or not, but the Basilica is actually the co-cathedral. Is the one in St. Paul. Even though Minneapolis has a very small Catholic population compared to St. Paul. But there are reasons, and this is why Jeannie and I find this so fascinating, is that these buildings are embodiments of history. They're books ready for us to read them once we learn how to.
Well, I think that just really sums it up. I like that. They're embodiments and they're books that we get to learn
How to read them.
So, well, again, thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Marilyn, so much. We just can't thank you enough for your time on this and for all the work that you did. This is such a boost to our research, and it's a big boost to our community too. I hope everybody gets a chance to explore the site and
Okay. All right, we'll be back. Yeah, oops. Okay, so here we are, we're back. All right. So this is the website with the direction on it, the address. We're just so grateful for that. We hope this project continues. And just as there are a lot of institutions that weren't included in their study, there are also sacred spaces that we haven't been able to study yet in the Highland area. But we look forward to working with congregations in Highland, and hopefully we'll get their histories and then be able to share them with others. One church that I did want to share the picture of with is the Pilgrim Baptist. This is the church. It's at Central Avenue and West and Grotto, and that's the actual church. Remember, that was a story about the slaves, the freed slaves that were found on the Mississippi and brought up to Fort Snelling. Now we're going to go into sacred spaces, and we're going to have Margaret, who is a specialist in sacred architecture. She will talk to us now. Margaret?
Yep, thanks, Jan. I just wanted to make a few comments on sacred space. Sacred space can be found just about anywhere, whether in the beauty and reverence of nature or a special place in our own home, any place where the secular can be interrupted by the sacred. The Dakota peoples, for example, used profound places in nature, such as Bedote, the confluence of the Mississippi and the Minnesota rivers, source for their creation story. Much of the 20th century sacred architecture of Highland captures symbols and house rituals for its congregants' particular belief system. Paul Goldberger, architectural critic, stated that perhaps the most important thing that sacred space can do is to show us where the sacred is hidden among us, to help us find the transcendent.
So here we begin with the Adath.
Yes, I would like to start with telling you about the roots of this Jewish synagogue known as Adath Israel Orthodox Synagogue of St. Paul. It's located on Edgecombe Road. These roots go back to the West Side Flats that Marilyn had discussed and other communities that she spoke about. Several synagogues merged their funds and their membership, form a congregation which moved to Highland Park in the early 1960s. Catherine, we'll move to the Temple of Aaron. In 1910, regarding the Temple of Aaron, a conservative synagogue, later named the Temple of Aaron, was planned. Ashland and North Grotto was the site of the construction that went on from 1913 to 1916. The Temple of Aaron remained there until a major fire hit that property in 1952. They were forced to move, and they designed this newly built Highland Park location on the Mississippi River Boulevard in 1956. A sculpture on the wall of that particular picture on the left is of a base, because this wall faces the Mississippi River, it represents a waterfall and the flowing water in a stream. This is a dominant theme of the Temple of Aaron Synagogue. Next picture, Catherine. This picture, Marilyn referred to the abstract expressionist artist known as Helen Frankenthaler. She designed this hand-woven Torah cover on the left. The Torah holds, and I'm quoting, the repository of Jewish teachings, according to authors, historians, Hy Berman and Linda Schlapp in their book, Minnesota Jews in Minnesota. On the right side is an example of the sanctuary banners. Each Hebrew month has a banner created by the women of Temple of Aaron. An earlier photograph had included some of the William Saltzman stained glass windows at the Temple of Aaron. Jackie?
Okay, next one. So next we come to one of the early churches, the Church of St. Therese, which started out as a chapel. It was before the chapel was built, the Catholics would have to cross the river, to attend services at Fort Snelling. And it was kind of a makeshift space. So the Little Flower Chapel was built in 1926 at Norfolk and Pryor, just up from the River Boulevard. And then in the 1950s, the new Church of St. Therese was built. This parish eventually consolidated with St. Gregory's and St. Leo's, but it served the immigrant populations of Eritreans as St. Gabriel Orthodox, and the Koreans, St. Andrew Kim Korean Church. They were there for a number of years. And then now it is St. Mary's Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And next we have a view of the worship service on the interior of the church. And they have transformed it to be more of their style. Okay, the next is St. Gregory's.
And I'll talk about that, right? St. Gregory the Great Church was founded in 1951 at the location of 1668 Montreal Avenue at Davern Street, until it merged with two other Highland Park Catholic churches to form Lumen Christi Catholic Community. This same site, minus the bell tower that you see on the left, but with an additional building that has classrooms and a gym, is now occupied by the Urban Academy Charter School for grades kindergarten through 6th grade. Next, Catherine. We have a picture of St. Leo in its construction phase. It was built in 1966, St. Leo's, located at the intersection of Boland and Cleveland Avenues in Highland Park. Its circular design was in keeping with the Vatican II. Today, it is the home of the Lumen Christi Catholic Community, which is the merged entity of the three Catholic churches. Whoops, we skipped around. Can we go back? This is interior construction. The workers are working on the bema, well, what would be the platform for the pulpit. And these give you an idea of how the construction is going inside. The next one. Okay, so we have a picture of the merged entity that now occupies this site that used to be called St. Leo's, is now made up of St. Therese, St. Leo's, and St. Gregory's congregations. It was completed, that merger, in 2011. The new parish is called Lumen Christi Catholic Community.
Well, this church was built in 1909 at South Wheeler and Wordsworth, but I believe it was probably torn down. This community originally met in a grocery store, which was probably on 7th Street. Then, and the next slide is the new church that was built in 1958. It's at Edgecombe and Field. There we go. And that is the new church for this community. And next we have Gloria Day and Susan. Susan, do you have? Well,
Not mute, I'm sorry.
oh, she's on mute. Okay.
In 1908, Gloria Day began as a mission church established by First Lutheran Church of St. Paul in a small building on Victoria and Hague. But after World War II, we needed more space. Gloria began to plan in earnest to expand. They had purchased 2 lots at Summit and Hamlin, but sold both to Mount Zion Temple and purchased the current site, as shown in the picture, at Snelling and Highland Parkway. This building was dedicated in 1952. Denise?
Next, Catherine. The Messiah Episcopal Church is located at McAllister and Ford Parkway today in Highland Park and has been since 1947. However, surprisingly, wait, go back, thank you. This Episcopal parish has its roots from 1891 in other locations. Among its ministries at this site, it continues to have outreach to the Karen people, and they come in from the wider area of the Twin Cities. This is a tribal group that came originally from Myanmar, also known as Burma in Southeast Asia. Next. A picture of Edgecombe Presbyterian Church, located just west of Snelling Avenue on Edgecombe Road and south or west of Highland Park High School. It's designed by Ellerby and Company and built in Highland Park in 1955. It serves its congregation with its co-ministers, co-pastor ministers. The sign suggests, oh, next picture, Catherine. Okay, there you go. But this site also has outreach to the community, AA meetings, etc., held in the church premises.
Okay, well, this is a picture of Our Lady of Victory Chapel at St. Catherine. The photo is probably from the 1940s. And St. Catherine's was founded in 1905. This building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Can we have the next slide? So now, during this season, the campus is beautifully lit, and everybody remarks on it, how it really brings so much cheer to these dark nights. Two St. Joseph's sisters created a booklet called The Advent Names of God that features images and prayers rooted in Israel's longing for a Messiah. They're also known as the O antiphons. I'm going to go on to the next. This is the work, the illustration is by Sister Ansgar Holmberg, and the poem is by Sister Joan Mitchell. And now, as we're really basically sharing the legacy of these many sacred spaces, we're going to kind of wrap up by reading this selection from O Wisdom and sharing a few more of the spirit of Highland for this season. O Wisdom, we live in your embrace, in vast night, freckled with stars and hints of you that, oops, Catherine, you have to go back, that haunt our solitude, and hints of you that haunt our solitude, that writhe untamed in the work of every birth.
We spin with the earth, Alamand, our sun, turning toward light in the spill of stars, holding and letting go, shining and imploding in invisible dance. Mother womb of all becoming, in you stardust lives and breathes, slithers, trots, hops, runs, born of watery chaos and the mystery of trees, making air of light.
You are the whole that lives in every part, the circle in which we dance, the relentless summons to communion in which we sleep and wake.
So we have a few other photos of St. Catherine lit up at night, the pond and the trees. And if you get a chance, just take a little walk there and enjoy that. They really created a magical kingdom. Okay, Jane, would you like to read this quote from the wall at Temple of Aaron? Oh, I think Jane is on mute.
Let justice well up like water and righteousness as a mighty stream.
Okay, thank you. And then the next photo is of tradition in Highland, which is the Menorah Parade. And that happened last Sunday. And not only the Adat synagogue has it, but also Mount Zion, and load up the cars with their Hanukkah candles and drive through the city and are cheered by everybody. It's a very lively, lovely moment in Highland. Okay, next we have commemoration of Kwanzaa, which actually Dr. Mulanga Karenga, a professor and chairman of Black Studies at California State University, created Kwanzaa in 1966. Kwanzaa is derived from the phrase Matunda ya Kwanzaa, which means first fruits in Swahili. The 7 principles, or Ngoso Saba, are a set of ideals designated by Dr. Karenga. Each day of Kwanzaa emphasizes a different principle. And into Highland, we have a message. I mean, where else do we get to have a message? Love more important than ever. Really what we needed to hear. And this we give thanks to Muller Jewelers, who we've interviewed. And Colleen, we'll let you finish off.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is the Holiday of Hope tree, and it's located at the corner of Ford Parkway and Cleveland Avenue in Highland. This display was organized by the Highland Business Association this year as a gift to the community. The association felt that this is especially important to spread a message of hope and light, particularly this year, these days of darkness. The gifts under the tree identify businesses and organizations from the community who gave time and money to create this display. And Friends of Highland Arts is a member of the Highland Business Association, and we are proud to be one of the sponsors of this Holiday of Hope tree.
So that ends our little visit of sacred spaces. And that basically ends our program. We're Highland Heritage and Friends of Highland Arts, and the recording is now going to be probably stopped.